My wife had no idea I owned $20 billion in stock from her father's company. I always lived a modest life, so she assumed I had very little. One evening, she invited me to dinner with her parents. I wanted to see how they would treat someone they thought was broke, right up until they quietly pushed an envelope across the table. Imagine sitting at a fancy family dinner, the air thick with tension, when your father-in-law slides a leather folder across the table. Inside? Annulment papers for your marriage and a check for $250,000. His generous offer to get me out of his daughter's life, forever. It was a moment that ripped away any pretense, revealing the cold, hard truth. Some people would rather buy you out of their lives than ever truly accept you. Just 5 minutes later, everything changed. But for 23 long years, my wife, Julia, had no idea I held a secret. She didn't know I secretly owned nearly half of her father's multi-billion-dollar company, a stake worth more than $20 billion. To her, to everyone, I was just Owen, her ordinary consultant husband, driving an old car, living in a small, unassuming East Austin apartment. She believed in our quiet life, in our choices, but her parents, they saw a failure. Then, one crisp Tuesday morning, a text message arrived. I was 51 years old, and after 21 years married to Julia, I could practically read the temperature of her silences. This particular silence, the kind that came with her staring, unblinking, at her phone while her coffee went cold, meant only one thing: her parents were planning something. A chill went down my spine, a familiar, unwelcome feeling. "Let me guess," I said, trying to keep my voice light from across our worn kitchen table. We'd bought that table at an estate sale nearly 2 decades ago, back when our world felt simpler. "Your mother." Julia looked up, her expression a mix of resignation and dread, then slid her phone across the wood. The message was brief, formal, and utterly chilling. "Dinner. Friday, 7 p.m. Important family matter. Mother." "When my parents get this formal," Julia murmured, her voice barely a whisper, "someone usually gets hurt." She wasn't wrong. Evelyn Harrington, my mother-in-law, didn't do casual. A dinner invitation delivered by text? That wasn't a family gathering. It was a business transaction, a summons. "We're going," I stated, the words firm, leaving no room for argument. "Oh, we are definitely going. I want to see exactly what they're planning." What Julia didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, because I had spent 14 painstaking months deliberately not telling her, was that I'd been waiting for this exact moment. I'd seen it building, brick by brick, in the casual, cutting comments at Thanksgiving, in the way Douglas Harrington, my father-in-law, looked at me like I was some pesky problem that needed to be neatly solved. I'd seen it in the way our own daughter, Quinn, had started treating me, with a subtle, uncomfortable embarrassment. They truly believed they held all the power. They thought I was precisely what I appeared to be, a 51-year-old logistics consultant, driving a 9-year-old Honda, living in a modest house in a gentrifying East Austin neighborhood. A man with no ambition, no future, nothing to offer. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was this. 25 years ago, I'd inherited a cool $500,000 from my grandfather, Robert Hartley. And instead of blowing it on some fancy car or a lavish vacation, I did something different. I bought stock, quietly, carefully, in a struggling real estate development company. Douglas Harrington's company. He was drowning in debt, reeling from the 2008 financial crisis, convinced his world was ending. But I had studied that company for months, meticulously poring over its financials. Its fundamentals were rock solid. Its projects were perfectly positioned. Douglas just needed capital. So, I started buying, layer after layer of corporate entities, shell companies, all carefully designed so not a single share could ever be traced back to Owen Hartley, the humble consultant. Within 3 years, I owned 15%. By the time I met Julia at a charity fundraiser, a chance encounter that changed everything, I owned 31%. At our wedding, 42%. Today, I owned a staggering 47% of Harrington Development Group. At current valuations, my position was worth approximately $20 billion. Douglas Harrington worked for me. He just didn't know it. "Owen." Julia's voice, soft and worried, pulled me back from my thoughts. "Promise me you won't let them bully you." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "I promise," I said, meeting her gaze, a new resolve hardening my voice. "I promise they'll see exactly who I am." She squeezed my fingers, her trust in me absolute, the same trust she'd given me for 21 years. When I'd asked her to live modestly, to build a life on something real, something more profound than mere appearances, she'd never questioned it. When her mother had offered to help us buy a house in Westlake Hills, Julia had politely, firmly said no. When her father had suggested I could do better than consulting work, she'd defended me fiercely. She had chosen me, chosen us, over their glittering, superficial world. And she had never once, not once, made me feel like it cost her anything. But it had cost her. I'd watched her parents year after year slowly withdraw their warmth. Watched them seat us at the far end of the table at holiday dinners as if we were an afterthought. Watched them introduce Julia with a slightly apologetic tone, as if her marriage to me was a regrettable mistake she'd eventually, surely, outgrow. For 14 agonizing months, I'd been testing them. Deliberately. Driving that old Honda when I could have bought any car on earth. Wearing off-the-rack shirts to their exclusive country club events. Allowing Douglas to lecture me, condescendingly, about business vision, lectures about decisions I'd actually approved, decisions that flowed directly from my anonymous holdings. I wanted to know. I needed to know. Would they ever see past the surface? Would my own daughter love me for who I was rather than what I appeared to have? Julia picked up her phone, typing a response to her mother. "I'm telling her we'll be there," she said, her voice resigned. "Good," I replied, a quiet determination settling deep in my gut. Outside our window, East Austin was waking up. Our neighborhood, once sleepy, had changed so much since we'd moved here. Quirky coffee shops had replaced dusty auto repair shops. Our house, a modest $200,000 purchase in 2004, was probably worth $450,000 now. We could have moved a dozen times over. Could have bought one of those sprawling Spanish colonial estates in Westlake Hills. Could have joined their country club, played their games. But Julia had never asked for any of that. And I had never offered. My grandfather, Robert Hartley, had taught me something Douglas Harrington never learned. The true measure of a man isn't what he owns, but what he does with what he has. He taught me that wealth without wisdom is just numbers on a screen, hollow and fleeting. Robert had built a company with Douglas 30 years ago, a partnership that ended when Douglas started cutting corners, compromising his integrity for a quick buck. My grandfather, a man of unwavering principles, had simply walked away. The money he left me came with a letter, an instruction, really. I'd read it so many times, I could recite it from memory. If Douglas falls again, and he will, help him. Not because he deserves it, but because his family does. Save his company, but more importantly, save his soul. I'd been following those instructions for 25 years. Julia stood up, walking around the table to press a kiss to the top of my head. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you, too," I replied, my voice thick with a mix of affection and an unspoken weight. What she didn't know was that every single expansion Douglas credited to his brilliant leadership had been funded with my capital. That massive domain expansion he'd lectured me about last Thanksgiving? I'd approved that funding. The iconic downtown Congress Avenue Tower? My investment made it possible. The disaster recovery after the floods? I'd quietly bought up all the distressed properties and held them, waiting for the right moment. Douglas Harrington had spent 21 years treating me like a failure, and I'd spent 25 years making damn sure his company succeeded despite him. Friday would bring the confrontation I'd been preparing for. And this time, I wouldn't stay silent. Friday evening arrived with that familiar, oppressive October heat, the kind that makes Texas unforgiving, even as autumn attempts to settle in. I drove our Honda, that old, dependable sedan, through the familiar streets of East Austin. Twilight painted the sky in shades of bruised orange and deep purple. Julia was silent beside me, her hand resting lightly on the center console, close enough for me to reach. We'd made this drive countless times over our 21 years together, but tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like crossing a border into enemy territory. Holly Street, our street, slipped past the windows. Small houses with chain-link fences, kids playing basketball in driveways, the familiar scent of the taco truck on the corner doing brisk business. Our neighbors were teachers and musicians, city workers and small business owners. People who measured wealth in Friday night barbecues and Little League games, not in square footage and stock portfolios. "We don't have to do this," Julia said softly, her voice fragile. I glanced at her. In the fading light, she looked exactly as she had the night I'd met her 23 years ago at that museum fundraiser. Dark hair, kind eyes, a smile that had made me forget every careful plan I'd ever made. She'd been wearing a simple black dress, while the other women wore designer gowns. That's how I'd known, instantly, that she was different. "Yes, we do," I said, taking her hand, my grip firm. We turned onto Mopac, and the world began to change. The highway carried us north, through Austin's vibrant heart, past the university where, in our early years, I'd taught evening logistics classes for extra money. Past the office parks where I still maintained my consulting practice. Traffic was surprisingly light for a Friday evening. Most people were heading downtown for dinner and drinks, for fun, not towards the hills where old money lived behind imposing stone walls and impeccably manicured lawns. As we climbed towards Westlake, the houses grew larger, not gradually, not gently. That would have been honest. Instead, there was a stark, brutal line where modest became extravagant, where lived-in became showcased. Chain-link fences gave way to ornate wrought iron. Front porches disappeared, replaced by grand circular drives. Grass became grounds. Julia's hand tightened in mine. I used to think this was normal, she confessed, looking out at the sprawling estates rolling past. Growing up here, I thought everyone lived like this. She paused, a wistful smile playing on her lips. When did you realize they didn't? The first time I came to your apartment, I answered, remembering that tiny studio near campus, with its window air conditioner and hot plate. You made me spaghetti. I'd never been so happy. She chuckled softly, but there was a sadness lurking beneath it. My mother almost had a stroke when I told her we were dating. She had 2 strokes when I told her we were engaged. Julia turned to face me fully, her eyes reflecting the passing streetlights. She pulled me aside at the engagement party and asked if I was pregnant, like that was the only possible explanation for why I'd choose you. The memory still stung, even after all these years. Evelyn Harrington had smiled at me that entire evening, a predatory smile, while plotting every conceivable way to end our engagement. She'd offered Julia a 6-month trip to Europe to clear her head. She'd suggested I might be more comfortable pursuing someone from my own background. She'd even subtly intimated that a small payment might help me see reason. I'd refused every single offer, every bribe, every insult. And Julia, bless her heart, had married me anyway. We exited Mopac onto Loop 360, and suddenly, we were in Westlake proper. This wasn't just wealthy, this was generational wealth. The kind that came with country club memberships passed down like ancient heirlooms, with property taxes that exceeded most people's annual salaries. Valley Ridge Drive, Julia said, her voice flat, as I turned onto her parents' street. The Harrington estate sat on 4 meticulously landscaped acres at the end of a cul-de-sac, positioned perfectly to overlook the sprawling hill country, like a fortress surveying its domain. Spanish colonial architecture, gleaming white stucco walls, a red tile roof, arched windows that probably cost more than our entire house. The kind of place that appeared in Austin Home magazine with titles like Classic Elegance or Timeless Grace. I pulled into the circular driveway, parking our humble Honda behind a gleaming Mercedes and a sleek Lexus. Through our windshield, the house looked more like a museum than a home. Every window glowed with warm light, but there was nothing remotely welcoming about it. Owen. Julia turned to me, and I saw real fear in her eyes. Raw, unadulterated fear. Promise me you won't let them bully you. I promise they'll see exactly who I am, I reiterated, echoing my words from Tuesday morning. But this time, I meant something profoundly different. This time, I meant all of me. We sat for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, the Texas heat pressing down even as the sun finally disappeared. My mind drifted to the letter, my grandfather's letter, tucked safely in my jacket pocket at home. The one that had guided 25 years of my life. The one that would change everything tonight if I chose to share it. Ready? I asked, my voice calm, belying the storm brewing inside me. Julia nodded, but her hand trembled noticeably as she reached for the door handle. We walked up the stone pathway together, past the perfectly manicured lawn that probably required a dedicated team of gardeners, past the fountain that burbled expensively, past the carefully curated landscape lighting that made everything look like a stage set. I rang the doorbell. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see movement. But when the heavy door opened, it wasn't Douglas or Evelyn who greeted us. It was Carmen, the housekeeper, her face professionally neutral. But I'd known her long enough to recognize the apology, the quiet sympathy in her eyes. She'd worked for the Harringtons for 15 years. She'd seen everything. Mr. Hartley, Mrs. Hartley, she said formally, stepping aside. Please come in. I looked past her into the cavernous foyer. Marble floors, a chandelier that probably cost 6 figures, fresh flowers in a Waterford crystal vase, the same vase from the home tour Julia's mother had given us years ago. All elegance, all expense. But no Douglas, no Evelyn, no Quinn. Just Carmen, in her crisp uniform, taking our coats as if we were clients arriving for a scheduled appointment. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a business transaction, and I had just walked into the opening act of whatever they had planned. Douglas appeared in the foyer before Carmen could even finish stepping aside. He was 70 years old, but still carried himself like a man who'd built empires, which I suppose he truly believed he had. He wore a navy blazer over an open-collared shirt, the kind of effortless expensive that came from personal shoppers and unlimited budgets. His silver hair was perfectly trimmed. His tan spoke of endless golf courses and exclusive boat clubs. Owen, he said, extending his hand. The handshake was designed to dominate. He gripped too hard, held too long, his thumb pressing against the back of my hand in that alpha male way some men never outgrow. His eyes locked on mine, searching for the flinch he expected, the show of submission. I gave him nothing. Just met his gaze steadily, unflinchingly, and waited for him to release first. He did, but not before a flicker of irritation, sharp and fleeting, crossed his face. Julia, sweetheart, his voice transformed completely, melting into a syrupy warmth as he turned to his daughter. Affectionate in a way it had never been with me. He kissed her cheek, held her shoulders, looked at her with something approaching genuine love. That was the thing about Douglas Harrington. He wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a father who, in his twisted way, believed he was protecting his daughter from a terrible mistake. And that, I knew, made him far more dangerous than any monster. "Where's Mother?" Julia asked, her voice tight. "Living room. You know how she is about entrances." He led us through the grand foyer, past the sweeping staircase, and the gallery of family photographs that documented generations of Harrington's success. Julia at her debutante ball. Julia graduating from UT, Julia at her wedding, though notably, that particular photo was significantly smaller than the others and strategically positioned where casual visitors might easily miss it. Evelyn rose from a plush leather wingback chair as we entered the living room. 67 years old, and elegant in the way that required hours of daily maintenance, yoga, facials, whatever expensive procedures women of her generation and tax bracket used to hold time at bay. She wore cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse. Pearls, of course. Always pearls. "Darling," she purred to Julia, embracing her with a kind of careful hug that meticulously avoided disturbing makeup or wrinkles. Then, her gaze, sharp and cold, landed on me. Owen. One single word, delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She leaned in for an air kiss, her lips passing somewhere near my cheek without actually making contact. Her perfume was expensive, overwhelming. Chanel, probably. Something that cost more per ounce than most people spent on groceries in a week. "Evelyn," I replied, matching her tone, perfectly neutral. "Thank you for having us." "Of course," she said, her smile widening, though still not reaching her eyes. "Family is everything." The word family came out with just enough emphasis to make it explicitly clear that I was something separate, distinctly outside of that sacred category. A voice from the corner made me turn. "Oh, hey Mom." "Hey, Dad." Quinn was sprawled on the sofa, thumbs flying across her phone screen. 18 years old, blonde hair pulled into a careless ponytail, wearing designer jeans that probably cost $400, but were artfully torn to look casual, rebellious. She didn't even look up from whatever social media crisis demanded her immediate attention. "Quinn." Julia's voice was soft, laced with a fragile hope. "Put the phone down, honey." "In a second." The second never came. Quinn kept scrolling, kept typing, kept existing in whatever digital world she'd disappeared into. This was new. Or rather, this was worse. There had been a time, not so long ago, when Quinn would have looked up, smiled, when her parents entered a room. There had been a time when she actually looked happy to see us. "Shall we?" Douglas gestured towards the dining room with the confident air of a man utterly accustomed to being obeyed. The dining room was everything I'd expected, and then some. A long, gleaming mahogany table that could easily seat 12, but was intimately set for 5. A crystal chandelier overhead, the kind that required someone to climb a ladder and painstakingly clean each individual piece. Windows overlooking the back terrace and pool, strategically lit to showcase the breathtaking hill country view beyond. And the seating arrangement was perfect. Douglas at the head of the table, naturally. The seat of power, the position of judgment. Evelyn to his right, close enough to murmur strategic observations. Quinn beside her grandmother, already subtly aligned with the program, even if she didn't realize it yet. Julia and I were directed to the opposite side, physically separated from the family unit, outnumbered 3-2. Positioned so we had to look up the entire length of the table to meet Douglas's eyes. It was courtroom seating, defendant and counsel on one side, prosecution on the other, judge presiding. The table itself was set with enough crystal and china to fund a semester of college. Multiple glasses per person, water, wine, something else I didn't recognize. Charger plates that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. Linen napkins folded into intricate, perfect shapes. A floral centerpiece that looked professionally arranged, almost too perfect to touch. This wasn't dinner. This was theater. Carmen appeared, bottle in hand, pouring wine for Douglas first, then Evelyn, working her way around the table with practiced, efficient grace. When she reached me, I caught her eye and saw the flicker of warning there. She'd worked in this house long enough to recognize when something was brewing, something ominous. Douglas lifted his wine glass. The crystal caught the chandelier light, refracting it into tiny rainbows that danced across the crisp white tablecloth. "Before we begin," he announced, his voice carrying the weighty gravitas of prepared remarks. "I want to propose a toast." He looked at Julia, then briefly at me, then back to Julia. "To family," he intoned, "to the bonds that define us, the legacy we protect, the future we secure." Every word was chosen deliberately. Every pause calculated. Julia raised her glass hesitantly. Quinn glanced up from her phone just long enough to lift hers, a bored gesture. Evelyn's smile was serene, the expression of someone who already knew exactly how the evening would unfold. I raised my glass. And said nothing. To family, they echoed, the word feeling less like a sentiment and more like a threat. As we drank, a cold, hard truth settled over me. This dinner had never truly been about family at all. The first course arrived with an almost studied elegance that made eating feel less like nourishment and more like work. Carmen placed delicate plates before each of us, seared scallops with microgreens, artfully dotted with sauce that probably had some impossibly long French name. Food designed to impress, to be admired, rather than to satisfy. Douglas cut into a scallop with surgical precision. We just finalized the domain expansion project, he announced, as if continuing a conversation we'd all been part of for weeks. A 10-year development. $2.3 billion in total investment. It takes real vision to see opportunities like that. He said it with the same condescending tone professors use when explaining basic concepts to struggling students. I approved that funding. Every single dollar came from my holdings. He was lecturing me about a project I greenlit 18 months ago. But I just nodded, a placid mask on my face, and said, sounds ambitious. The words seemed to disappoint him. He wanted engagement, maybe an argument. Instead, I gave him nothing. It's the largest mixed-use development in Central Texas, he continued, undeterred, needing to fill the silence with his own self-importance. Your father understands real estate, Julia. He built this company from nothing. From nothing. The lie was so smooth, so well-rehearsed, he probably believed it himself. Evelyn picked up the thread, as smoothly as a relay runner taking the baton. Julia, darling, did I mention I ran into Preston Chambers last week? Julia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Evelyn continued, her voice light, casual, yet sharp as glass. He's doing remarkably well. Just bought a place in River Oaks. Absolutely stunning property, 4 acres. The garden alone is something out of Architectural Digest. I'm happy for Preston, Julia said carefully, her voice strained. He asked about you, of course. Evelyn's smile could have cut diamond. He's still single, you know. Still building that portfolio. Some people really do make the most of their potential. The implication hung in the air like poison gas, suffocating. Across the table, Quinn finally looked up from her phone. Grandfather's given me real responsibilities now, she declared, and I couldn't tell if she was talking to me or through me. I'm coordinating with the development team on the domain integration. Real work, strategic planning, not just consulting. She said consulting like it was something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. That's wonderful, honey, Julia said, trying to catch our daughter's eye, a desperate plea in her voice. But Quinn wasn't looking at her mother anymore. She was looking at me. Really looking at me, for the first time all evening, her gaze cold and assessing. Some of us are actually building careers, you know? Real careers, with real companies. Not just shuffling papers and calling it strategy. The contempt in her voice was pure Harrington, distilled and bitter. Quinn, Julia's voice had an edge now, the one I recognized, the one that came out when she was defending me to her family for the 1000th time. What? I'm just being honest. Quinn shrugged with that casual cruelty only teenagers and the very wealthy can truly master. Don't you ever wish you'd made different choices, Mom? The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Don't you ever wonder what life would be like if you'd married someone with actual ambition? Quinn continued, her eyes locked on mine, a challenge. Someone who wanted to build something? Someone who wouldn't embarrass you at country club events. Julia's hand trembled as she set down her fork. That's your father you're talking about. I know who he is, Quinn said. And the way she said it, flat, final, dismissive, hurt more than anything her grandparents had ever done. Because they were supposed to look down on me. But Quinn, she was supposed to be different. She was supposed to see past the surface, to the man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd helped with her algebra homework, who'd sat through every agonizing school play and volleyball game. Instead, she'd become exactly like them. The main course arrived, beef preparation that probably cost more per ounce than I spent on groceries in a week. Carmen moved around the table silently, her face carefully neutral, but I saw the tension, the slight tremor in her shoulders. The point is, Douglas declared, as if Quinn's outburst had been a perfectly natural part of the conversation, success requires a certain mindset. A willingness to take risks, to operate at a level most people simply can't reach. Every expansion you credit to your leadership was funded with capital you didn't know you had. Every tower with your name on it exists because I made it possible. You've been operating on my money for 25 years while lecturing me about ambition. But I stayed perfectly still, which I could tell infuriated them more than any argument. Evelyn turned to Julia, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. Darling, we can't watch you struggle financially because of pride. There are resources available, opportunities. Preston, for instance, mentioned he's looking for a director of. I'm not struggling, Mother, Julia interjected, but her voice cracked, betraying her. Of course not, darling. Of course not. The words dripped with pity, with a barely concealed triumph. They were circling like sharks now, each comment carefully calibrated, designed to remind me I didn't belong, that I'd never belong, that the best thing I could do for everyone was simply disappear. Dessert came and went. Some elaborate chocolate construction with gold leaf. Coffee was poured. Quinn had gone back to her phone, her work apparently done, her contribution to the evening's cruelty complete. Douglas and Evelyn exchanged glances, a silent communication born of decades of marriage and shared purpose. Then Douglas cleared his throat, a sound that silenced the table more effectively than any shout. He reached beneath his chair, his movements deliberate, almost theatrical. When his hand emerged, it held a leather folder, expensive, substantial, the kind lawyers use for important documents. He placed it on the table between the coffee cups and dessert plates with a soft thud that might as well have been a gunshot. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Julia's hand found mine under the table, her fingers cold and trembling. Douglas looked at me with an expression I'd seen countless times before in boardrooms and negotiation tables, the expression of a man who believed he'd already won, who was simply waiting for his opponent to acknowledge defeat. Owen, he said, and for the first time all evening, his voice carried something other than condescension. It carried finality. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your future with this family. The leather folder sat between us like a coiled snake, dark and menacing. And I knew, with absolute, gut-wrenching certainty, that whatever was inside it would change everything. The leather folder landed on the table with that soft, sickening thud, a sound that cut through the tension and silenced the room completely. Douglas slid it across the polished mahogany toward me, with the unshakable confidence of a man who had closed 1,000 deals, negotiated contracts worth billions, and believed, truly believed, he understood exactly how power worked. Go ahead, he commanded, his voice a low challenge. Open it. I didn't move. Just looked at him, across the gleaming expanse of wood. At the smug satisfaction in his eyes. At the careful, chilling neutrality of Evelyn's expression. At Quinn's studied indifference as she pretended to scroll through her phone, watching everything, missing nothing. Owen. Julia's voice was barely a whisper, a plea. I reached out, my hand steady despite the storm raging inside me. I opened the folder. Inside, stapled with the precision of a $500 an hour legal team, lay an annulment agreement. 20 pages of whereas clauses and party of the first part language that all boiled down to one simple, brutal proposition. My marriage had been a mistake, and mistakes, apparently, could be corrected for the right price. Clipped to the front was a check for $275,000. The number felt arbitrary, insulting, until I did the quick, bitter math. At $40,000 a year, what they probably assumed a mere consultant made, it represented nearly 7 years of income. Enough to start over, enough to disappear, enough to make everyone's problem go away. Owen, Douglas said again, leaning back in his chair, like a judge about to deliver an inevitable, crushing verdict. I'll be direct. You married above your station. That's not an insult. It's a fact. Julia could have had anyone. She could have had Preston Chambers. We tried to accept this marriage. God knows we tried, but we can't stand by and watch our daughter struggle financially because of pride. We're not struggling. Julia started, her voice breaking. Sweetheart. Evelyn's voice, oh so gentle, oh so pitying. You live in East Austin. You drive a car that's nearly 10 years old. You haven't taken a real vacation in how long? We can't pretend this is the life we wanted for you. This solves everything, Douglas continued, tapping the check with one perfectly manicured finger. That's more than you'd make in 7 years as a consultant, Owen. Sign the annulment. Take the money and move on. You'll be better off, and Julia can return to a life suited to her background, to her potential. The silence that followed pressed against my ears like a physical weight, suffocating. Then Julia stood up. So fast, her chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. This is insane. You can't buy people. You can't just, Julia, sit down. Douglas's voice, low and dangerous, carried the weight of decades of command, of a man accustomed to being obeyed by everyone from CEOs to wait staff. The adults are talking. I'm 46 years old, Dad. Her voice cracked, raw with pain and indignation. My husband is sitting right here while you're trying to, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me, absolutely certain he'd already won. Certain that every man had his price, and mine was clearly, neatly, written on that check. Then Quinn spoke. Mom. Her voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes just before earthquakes, before hurricanes, before those shattering moments that split your life into a definite before and after. Julia turned towards our daughter, disbelief warring with a desperate, fragile hope on her face. Quinn. Grandmother's right. Quinn set down her phone, giving us her full, undivided attention for the first time all evening. Her eyes, so much like Julia's, were now cold, assessing. You deserve better than this. Better than him. The words landed like bullets, sharp and precise. Quinn, don't, Julia whispered, a plea, a warning. But our daughter wasn't finished. She looked directly at me, 18 years old, and absolutely, frighteningly certain of her judgment. Dad, be honest. You're holding Mom back. Everyone can see it. You live in that tiny house. You drive that embarrassing car. All my friends' parents have lake houses and boats. And she stopped, recalibrated, then delivered the final, crushing blow. You're not good enough for her. You never were. She said it like a simple truth, like commenting on the weather or stating the obvious. No malice, no anger, just a chilling, cold assessment. Quinn. Julia cried, a desperate, broken sound. That's your father. I know who he is, Mom. Quinn turned back to her mother, and her voice softened slightly, became almost gentle. I love you, and I want you to be happy. But Dad's not making you happy. He's making you settle. She gestured at the check, contempt clear in the gesture. Take the money and go, Dad. You'd be doing everyone a favor. Mom could be with someone like Preston. Someone with a real future. Someone who wouldn't make her choose between her family and her marriage. Someone who wouldn't embarrass her. The word embarrass hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Julia broke then, truly broke, crying the way people do when something inside them finally shatters beyond repair. Her hands flew to cover her face, her shoulders shook, and I wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, but I couldn't seem to move. Because I had known this moment was coming. I had been preparing for it for 14 months, for 25 years. But knowing isn't the same as living it. Knowing isn't the same as watching your daughter measure your worth and summarily discard you. Watching your wife's parents treat your sacred marriage like a failed business venture that needed urgent liquidation. I had loved Julia without conditions. I had loved her through lean years and quiet victories, believing that true respect grew from patience, from unwavering commitment. I had swallowed every slight from her parents, endured every forced smile that weighed my income before my character. I thought time would soften them. I thought my daughter, my own flesh and blood, saw more. But in that agonizing moment, I understood how neatly money edits a story. How easily comfort masquerades as wisdom. They weren't offering a choice. They were erasing me. And the cruelest part wasn't the check. It was realizing that love, when measured in numbers, had already been declared tragically insufficient. Douglas watched my silence with smug satisfaction. Evelyn's expression remained carefully neutral, but there was an unmistakable gleam of triumph in her eyes. Quinn had gone back to her phone, her devastating contribution apparently complete. Only Julia was crying. Only Julia seemed to truly understand what had just happened. I picked up the check, examining it, letting them believe I was tempted. Letting them believe, just for a moment longer, that they had won. That's generous, I said quietly, my voice steady, betraying nothing. Douglas actually smiled. Actually, yes, it is. I set the check down carefully, deliberately, then reached into my pocket and took out my phone. Before I respond, I said, my voice still steady despite the cold, righteous rage building under my skin. I need to make a quick call. Douglas frowned, his self-satisfied smirk faltering. What does your attorney have to do with this? I looked at him then, truly looked at him. At the man who'd spent 25 years accepting my money while simultaneously dismissing my worth. At the woman who'd raised a daughter to value status over character. At the granddaughter they'd poisoned against me. Everything, I said. Then I dialed Julian Rodas, the attorney who had managed my interests for 25 years, and placed the phone on speaker in the center of the table. The dial tone echoed in the sudden, shocked silence, like a chilling countdown. And I watched as their certainty, that rock-solid belief in their own power, began, very slowly, to crack. Douglas stood up so fast, his chair scraped violently against the floor, a jarring sound in the sudden quiet. What do you think you're doing? He demanded, his voice a tense whisper. I kept my eyes on my phone, scrolling calmly through my contacts, as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. I told you. Making a call. Put that away. We're in the middle of a conversation. No, Douglas, I corrected him, my voice dangerously soft. We're at the end of one. You made your offer. Now I'm making mine. I found Julian's number and tapped it. The room went utterly silent, save for the insistent ringing through the speaker. Once. Twice. 3 times. Julian Rodas answered on the 4th ring. Owen? Everything all right? Julian's voice, calm and professional, filled the stunned room. Julian, sorry to call so late. I'm at dinner with the Harringtons, and we've hit a complication. Could you pull up the Hartley Holdings file? I need you to walk everyone through the ownership structure. A pause. A subtle shift in Julian's tone. The full structure? Everything, I confirmed, my gaze sweeping across the bewildered faces at the table. Start with Harrington Development. Douglas had gone pale, one hand gripping the table, his knuckles white. Evelyn looked utterly confused, glancing wildly between me and the phone. All right, Julian's voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the speaker. Harrington Development Group. Total valuation approximately $20 billion. 100 million shares outstanding. Evelyn inhaled sharply. 20 billion, she whispered, turning to Douglas, her voice laced with dawning horror. Let him finish, I said quietly, not taking my eyes off Douglas. Primary shareholder, Hartley Holdings LLC, incorporated in Delaware in 1999. Owns 47 million shares. That's 47% of outstanding equity. That's impossible, Douglas whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. He was secondary shareholder. Douglas Harrington Personal Holdings, 18 million shares. 18%. 18? Evelyn's voice was a strangled gasp, a horrified realization. You told me you own the majority. Remaining 35%, Julian continued, oblivious to the unfolding drama, distributed among various institutional investors, family trusts, and public shareholders. Quinn's voice, now raw and unsteady, cut through the shock. Wait, who owns Hartley Holdings? Hartley Holdings LLC is a single-member company, Julian stated, a matter-of-fact tone. Sole owner, Owen Hartley. Mr. Hartley has been the majority shareholder of Harrington Development Group since 2008. The silence that followed was absolute. Devastating. Douglas sank back into his chair, his body slumping like a puppet with cut strings. Thank you, Julian, I said, my voice calm, almost detached. Can you confirm the timeline? Initial investment, March 2008, Julian recited, the facts unfolding like a meticulously planned execution. During the financial crisis. Purchased distressed shares at 32 cents on the dollar. Initial stake, 15%. Douglas closed his eyes, a flicker of memory, of recognition, crossing his face. He was remembering now. The crisis, the banks calling in loans, the desperate scramble for capital, and the mysterious investor who had appeared from nowhere with a lifeline of cash. Additional purchases occurred over 16 years. 15% became 31% in 2010. 31% became 42% in 2012, following the Continental Properties acquisition, funded entirely by Hartley Holdings. 42% became 47% in 2018. Every expansion, I said, looking directly at Douglas, my voice low and cutting. Every acquisition. Every time you needed capital and the bank said no, I said yes. The Domain Project? That was me. The Downtown Tower? Me. The flood recovery in 2015? Me. I was never a mysterious investor, Douglas. I was your son-in-law. Evelyn's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with terror. But you're a logistics consultant. You drive a 15-year-old Honda Accord. I finished. I know. I also own nearly half of a $20 billion company. Both things are true. Julia was crying silently beside me, but she wasn't letting go of my hand. Quinn stared at me, her face pale, completely devoid of its earlier disdain. You've been rich this whole time? While we've been living in that tiny apartment. Living within our means, I corrected gently. Living honestly. Building a life based on what we earn, not what I inherited. Your mother knows about the money, Quinn. She's always known. She chose this life with me. I chose you, Julia choked out, her voice thick with tears, her grip on my hand fiercely possessive. I chose us. I chose real over impressive, every single day for 21 years. Douglas finally spoke, his voice hollow, defeated. The board meetings, the votes on major decisions, you've been approving everything. You've been letting me think I was in charge. You were in charge, I confirmed, of operations, of day-to-day decisions. You're good at that, Douglas. You're a talented businessman when you're not busy measuring your worth against everyone else's. But you could have fired me, he whispered, a desperate glint in his eye. Taken over. Yes, I said, my voice firm. I could have. But that was never the point. I leaned forward, the full weight of my grandfather's legacy behind my words. My grandfather left me money with one instruction, save his company and save him from himself. He was your father's partner, Douglas. Robert Hartley. You remember him. The color drained from Douglas's face. Robert, but he died 25 years ago. He left me a letter. Instructions. If Douglas falls again, catch him, but make sure he learns something first. I pulled a folded, yellowed envelope from my jacket. You were falling, Douglas. Gambling. Bad investments. Desperate enough to try selling the company to Preston Chambers without the approval of the majority shareholder, which is me. Evelyn gasped, a sharp, choked sound. Julian, I said into the phone, is there anything else they need to know? Just one thing, Owen, Julian's voice replied, cutting through the thick silence. Any sale or transfer of more than 10% requires majority shareholder approval. That would be you, Owen. Crystal clear. Thanks, Julian. Good luck, he said, and disconnected. I looked around the table. At Douglas, utterly shattered. At Evelyn, struggling to process, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. At Quinn, her worldview crumbling, her earlier cruelty now replaced by a dawning, terrible understanding. At Julia, still holding my hand, her tears a mix of grief and something else, something akin to fierce pride. So, here's where we are, I said quietly, letting the words hang in the air. You offered me $275,000 to leave my wife. That's roughly 7 years of my consultant salary. It's also about 3 hours of dividend income from my Harrington Development holdings. I stood, helping Julia to her feet. I don't want your money. I never did. I wanted a family. I wanted to be accepted for who I am, not what I own. Quinn made a small, broken sound, a tiny sob. But tonight, I continued, my voice hardening slightly, you've shown me exactly what you value. And it's not family. It's control. It's status. It's appearances. I picked up the torn check, the symbol of their contempt. I'm keeping this as a reminder of what I won't accept anymore. Julia, still holding my hand, moved toward the door. I followed, then paused. There's a board meeting Monday morning at 9, Douglas. I suggest you attend. We're going to discuss some changes in leadership. My gaze drifted to Quinn, who was now openly weeping. And Quinn, your position at Harrington Development is terminated, effective immediately. Not as punishment, as education. Learn what it means to build something yourself. We walked out into the warm Texas night, leaving them sitting amidst the ruins of everything they'd believed. Julia leaned against me in the driveway, shaking. That was terrifying, she whispered. I know, I replied, my voice raspy. That was necessary. I know that, too. We got into my 15-year-old Accord and drove back to East Austin, back to our 800-square-foot house, with its honest foundation, its quiet truth. Behind us, the reckoning had finally begun. The drive back to East Austin was only 10 miles, but it felt like crossing between two different worlds. We walked to the car in silence, the Harrington estate glowing behind us like something from a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I couldn't tell anymore. Julia's hand trembled in mine as I opened her door, and I held it for a moment longer than necessary, grounding us both. The first 10 minutes passed without a word. I drove through Westlake's perfect streets, past the country club where Douglas had lectured me about success, past the estates where people measured their worth in acreage and architectural photography. Then onto Loop 360, heading back towards the city. Austin spread out below us as we descended from the hills, a sprawl of lights and possibility, messy and real in ways Westlake would never be. The downtown skyline glowed in the distance. Our city, our home. Finally, Julia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been planning this? I kept my eyes on the road, watching the white lines disappear beneath our wheels. I wasn't planning revenge. The investment came first, years before I even met you. The testing. I paused, choosing my words carefully. That was only 14 months. 14 months. She turned toward me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. You let them treat you like that? For 21 years, Owen, you sat through their dinners, their comments there. Her voice broke. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me if I told you I married you only for you? I asked quietly, the question hanging heavy between us. Not for access to your family, or their connections, or the possibility of joining their world. I don't know, she admitted, finally, honestly. Maybe not at first. Maybe I would have wondered. That's why I didn't tell you. I needed you to know, to really know, that I chose you when there was nothing to gain. That I stayed when every logical reason said I shouldn't. That I loved you for exactly who you are, not what you came from. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of everything she was processing. Not just tonight. 21 years of choices. 21 years of defending me to her family. 21 years of wondering if maybe, just maybe, they were right. And Quinn, her voice cracked on our daughter's name, a fresh wave of pain. I let your parents poison her against me, I said, the admission like swallowing broken glass. I thought patience would teach her real values. I thought watching us build a life based on something other than money would show her what actually matters. I was wrong. Tears came then, from both of us. I pulled into a parking lot off Mopac, the road disappearing behind a blur of emotion. And sitting there, with the engine idling and the city lights swimming through our tears, we finally let it all out. All of it. 21 years of holding steady against her family's contempt. The utter exhaustion of always being measured and found wanting. The searing pain of watching our daughter become exactly what we tried so desperately to protect her from. What happens now? Julia asked when we could finally breathe again. The company will survive, I said. Douglas may accept the consulting role, or he may walk away. That's his choice. But the gambling stops, the fraud stops, the company gets protected from his worst impulses. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. And us? That's your choice, Julia. I understand if this is too much. If finding out I kept this from you for 21 years. Stop. She reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine, a fierce, protective grip. I choose you. I chose you 23 years ago at that museum fundraiser when you were wearing a suit you'd bought at Goodwill and didn't care who knew it. I chose you at our wedding when my mother was crying in the bathroom and my father barely spoke to you. I've chosen you every single day since. She squeezed my fingers hard. The man who shared that tiny apartment with me. The man who made spaghetti on a hot plate and called it a date. The man who never once made me feel like choosing him was choosing less. That's who I love. Not the billionaire. Not the majority shareholder. Just you. Something in my chest that had been locked tight for months, for years, finally released. 20 minutes later, we pulled into our driveway on Holly Street. After the Harrington Estates' 4 acres and Spanish colonial grandeur, our house looked small, ordinary. Perfect. The porch light we'd installed ourselves. The garden Julia had lovingly planted. The paint color we'd debated for weeks before finally choosing. Home. Inside, surrounded by 2 decades of accumulated life, books, photos, furniture we'd picked out together, Julia asked the question I'd been expecting. What about the money? I pulled her close. What do you want to do with it? I don't know, she admitted, a little overwhelmed. It doesn't feel real. It's real. And it's ours. We can start a foundation, fund scholarships, help families like the ones in our neighborhood afford to stay as prices rise. Whatever you want. And this house. She looked around our modest living room, her eyes tracing the familiar details. We're keeping it, I said firmly. I don't need a mansion in Westlake Hills. I never did. This is home. This is where we built our life. This is where we choose to be. She kissed me then, and it felt like a beginning rather than an ending. Monday would bring consequences. The board meeting, Douglas's removal, Quinn's reckoning with reality, difficult conversations with Evelyn. All of it waiting just beyond tomorrow's sunrise. But tonight, in our small house in East Austin, with 21 years of love surrounding us, we were richer than the Harringtons had ever been. Because we still had each other. And that, I was finally certain, was everything that mattered. Monday morning arrived, bringing with it gray skies and the heavy weight of consequences. The boardroom at Harrington Development occupied the 23rd floor of the Congress Avenue Tower, the very one I'd financed 12 years ago when Douglas desperately needed capital for downtown expansion. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but today, the view was obscured by clouds that pressed against the glass like silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. I arrived early. Julian Rodas met me in the lobby, a leather briefcase in hand, containing the meticulous documentation we'd prepared over the weekend. Stock certificates, ownership records, a legal paper trail that 25 years of careful corporate structuring had created. Ready? He asked, his voice calm, steady. I wasn't sure I was, but I nodded anyway. The board members arrived in clusters. Executives who'd worked under Douglas for years, outside directors representing institutional investors, the CFO who'd probably suspected something was wrong for months, but had wisely chosen not to ask questions. They filed in with coffee cups and tablets, their professional masks firmly in place. Douglas arrived last. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. The confident tan had faded to a sickly gray. His once authoritative stride had become tentative, almost shuffling. He wore a suit that still fit perfectly, but somehow looked wrong now, like a costume that no longer matched the character wearing it. Our eyes met across the boardroom. I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Not anger, not defiance, but resignation, maybe even a hint of relief. He took the seat at the far end of the table. Not the head anymore. Just another participant in the discussion of his own fate. Julian called the meeting to order at precisely 9 a.m. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for convening on short notice. This emergency session has been called by Owen Hartley, majority shareholder of Harrington Development Group, to address immediate governance concerns. The room shifted. Eyes turned to me. Some board members had clearly done their homework over the weekend, a dawning realization on their faces. Others were just now truly understanding what majority shareholder meant. Julian presented the documentation methodically. Incorporation papers for Hartley Holdings. Stock purchase records dating back 25 years. The current ownership structure. Owen Hartley, 47%. Douglas Harrington, 18%. The remaining 35% distributed among institutional and private investors. The numbers told the story, cleaner and more damning than any speech could. The agenda, Julian continued, his voice steady, is a vote on the current CEO position. Mr. Hartley has raised concerns about recent executive decisions that may have exposed the company to significant legal and financial risk. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The board members who needed to know had already received confidential briefings about the Preston Chambers situation, the undisclosed gambling losses, the attempted sale without majority shareholder approval. Discussion. Julian asked, a quiet invitation. The CFO spoke first, her voice firm. I move we vote immediately. The evidence speaks for itself. Second, said one of the outside directors. No one defended Douglas. No one spoke in his favor. Some faces showed sympathy, a quiet pity. But sympathy doesn't change fiduciary duty. This wasn't personal. It was business. And that, somehow, made it even worse. All in favor of removing Douglas Harrington from the position of Chief Executive Officer? Hands rose around the table. I counted silently. 14 in favor. Opposed, for hands, loyalty, perhaps, or just a reluctance to participate in ending a career. 78%, Julian stated. More than enough. The motion carries. Effective immediately, Douglas Harrington is removed from the position of CEO. An interim management team has been selected and will assume leadership tomorrow morning. Not me. I'd made that clear from the beginning. I didn't want to run the company. I wanted to protect it. There was a difference. Douglas stood slowly, gathering his tablet and phone with movements that seemed rehearsed, as if he'd been practicing this moment in his mind. He looked around the table once, at colleagues who'd worked beside him for years, at the boardroom where he'd made decisions that shaped skylines and neighborhoods. Then he walked out without a word. No dramatic speech, no protest, no breakdown. Just dignity and defeat, which somehow hurt more to watch than anger would have. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt like punctuation. I felt tired. Not victorious, not satisfied, not even relieved. Just utterly exhausted by the weight of what I'd had to do and what it had cost everyone involved. The interim CEO, a sharp woman named Rebecca Marshall, who'd been running operations for 3 years, took the empty seat. Let's talk about next steps, she said. And the meeting continued with the mundane details of transition plans and communication strategies. But I was thinking about Douglas, walking out that door. About the man my grandfather had once called a friend. About whether redemption was really possible, or if I had just destroyed him while convincing myself I was saving him. The meeting adjourned at 9:15 a.m. 11 minutes to end a career. Over the next 2 days, my phone collected 12 voicemails from Quinn. I didn't listen to them. Couldn't. Not yet. Julia's phone lit up constantly with texts. Mom, please. I don't understand. I'm sorry. Please talk to me. She didn't respond. Not yet. By Tuesday evening, Quinn had apparently realized that without the Harrington development connection on her resume, without the implicit promise of nepotism and family influence, no one was returning her calls. The marketing firms she'd applied to, the positions she'd assumed were hers for the asking, all went silent. The job market, it seemed, had a way of teaching lessons that 18 years of privilege had conveniently obscured. Lessons about merit and value, and what you're actually worth when the family name can't carry you. Julia found me on the back porch Tuesday night, looking out over East Austin. She's learning, Julia said quietly, sitting beside me. The hard way. Is there any other way? I didn't have an answer for that. Somewhere across town, Douglas was learning too. Learning what it meant to face consequences. Learning that second chances came with conditions. Learning, perhaps, what my grandfather had tried to teach him 30 years ago. And I was learning that power without purpose is just destruction, no matter how justified you think it is. Evelyn called Julia 17 times between Monday and Wednesday. Each call went to voicemail. Each message grew more desperate. I heard fragments when Julia played them back Tuesday evening, her phone clutched in both hands. Julia, sweetheart, please just let me explain. Click. Baby, I know we hurt you. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Click. Your father won't eat. He just sits staring at Robert Hartley's letter. Please call me back. Click. By Wednesday morning, Julia's resolve had cracked. I found her in the kitchen at 6 a.m., dark circles under her eyes. I want to be angry, she said, her voice raw. I want to make them suffer the way they made us suffer for 21 years. But all I can think about is my dad sitting alone and I. Her voice broke. I pulled her against my shoulder. You don't have to choose between anger and compassion. You can feel both. So, I can, she whispered. Yeah, that's not weakness, Jules. That's being human. She nodded. I think I need to talk to her. But I'm scared nothing will change. Then you set the terms. You decide what reconciliation looks like. She wiped her eyes. Okay, not yet. That afternoon, a courier arrived at our door. Delivery for Mrs. Julia Hartley, he said, extending a cream envelope with Evelyn's distinctive monogram. I signed for it and set it on the kitchen counter. Heavy cardstock, burgundy wax seal. My name was nowhere on it. This was for Julia alone. Julia arrived home at 5:30, groceries in both arms, animatedly talking about a scholarship recipient. She was smiling until she saw the envelope. The smile died. That's my mother's stationery. Julia approached it carefully, hesitantly. She ran her thumb across the wax seal, pressed with Evelyn's family crest. Do you want privacy? No, stay. I need you here. She broke the seal and extracted 3 pages, written in Evelyn's elegant, but now slightly wavering, handwriting. The letters were a little shaky, arthritis, making control difficult. Julia read in silence. I watched emotions flicker across her face, anger, grief, surprise, and then a fragile hope. When she finished, she handed me the letter. My dearest Julia, I'm writing by hand because typed felt too cold. My fingers ache. The doctor says arthritis, but I think it's shame. But I need you to see the effort. I've spent 3 days trying to understand how I became the kind of mother who would hand her son-in-law a check for $275,000 and tell him to leave her daughter. I taught you that love was transactional. That marriage was a contract between families. That your worth came from the man you chose and the life he could provide. When you fell in love with Owen, I saw failure. Not his. Yours. Mine. I'd given you every advantage, and you chose a logistics analyst who drove a 15-year-old car. I was humiliated. For 21 years, I punished you. Every dinner declined. Every cruelty about Owen's clothes or career. Every time I mentioned Preston Chambers. God, I'm so sorry about Preston. But you never wavered. You held his hand through every humiliation. You built a life that had more authenticity in 800 square feet than our Westlake estate has in all its 5,000. And I hated you for it. Not consciously, perhaps, but I hated that you were happy without the things I'd accumulated. I hated that you proved everything I'd built my identity on was hollow, your father, and I have had conversations these past few days that we should have had decades ago. About what we value. About what we've taught Quinn. About the fact that the man we've treated like hired help actually saved Douglas's company and asked nothing except basic respect. Owen's grandfather was right. Douglas needed saving from himself. And I needed saving from the person I'd become, the woman who measured her daughter's worth by her husband's bank account. I'm not asking forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm writing to tell you that I see you now. Really see you. For the first time since you were a little girl. I see a woman with courage I'll never possess. A woman who chose love over security. A woman launching a foundation that will change lives while I spent years planning charity galas that were really just excuses to wear expensive dresses. I see you, Julia, and I'm proud. And I'm so sorry it took me 21 years and your husband's devastating grace to finally open my eyes. If you're willing, I would like to talk. Not to excuse myself, but to begin becoming the mother you deserved. I understand if you're not ready, but I needed you to know that I see what I've done, and I'm committed to becoming different. I love you. I have always loved you. I just had no idea how to show it without conditions. Your mother. P.S. Please don't send money or gifts. If we rebuild this, it will be because we proved through time and consistency that we meant every word. I folded the letter carefully. Julia stood at the counter, tears streaming down her face. She called herself my mother, Julia whispered, a tremor in her voice. Not mother with a capital M, like she's trying to be different. She is trying, I said. Whether she succeeds is another question. Julia wiped her eyes. I want to see them. Not forgive them. Not yet. But I want to hear them say this to my face. Then invite them here. Your territory. Your terms. She nodded, pulling out her phone, her hands shaking slightly as she typed. Mom, I got your letter. Thank you. I'm not ready to forgive yet, but I'm willing to talk. Friday night, 7 p.m. Our house. Casual clothes, no gifts, no pretense. Just family trying to figure out if we can actually be one. Send it, I encouraged. She hit send. The message showed delivered, then read, almost instantly. A moment later, Evelyn's reply came. Finally. We'll be there. Thank you for giving us a chance. I love you. Julia sat down her phone, her eyes red, but clear. Friday. Oh God, what am I doing? Giving them an opportunity to prove they're serious. What if this is a mistake? Then we'll deal with it together. But Jules, I think your mom meant what she wrote. The arthritis detail. The admission about hating you. Those aren't manipulation tactics. You think they can change? I think they're terrified of losing you. And sometimes, fear is a better motivator than love. She nodded, then started putting away groceries with shaking hands. I helped her in silence. That night, lying in bed, Julia read the letter 3 more times by phone light. Finally, she curled against me. Owen? Yeah, thank you for letting me figure this out at my own pace. I kissed her forehead. They're your parents. You get to decide what forgiveness looks like. She was quiet for a moment. I think I want them back. Not the old them, but some version that's actually capable of being family. Is that naive? No, I whispered, holding her tight. That's hope. And hope isn't naive, it's brave. Friday was 3 days away. 3 days to prepare for a conversation that would either begin reconciliation or confirm that some relationships are simply too damaged to repair. I pulled Julia closer and hoped, for all of us, that forgiveness was possible. Sometimes it is. They stood at the door, looking smaller, somehow, than I'd ever seen them. Douglas still carried himself with that ex-CEO posture, but something essential, some spark of arrogance, had diminished. Evelyn clutched a bouquet of sunflowers and zinnias, wrapped in brown paper, the kind you'd buy at the Mueller Farmers Market, not from some expensive florist. Julia opened the door. She'd been a bundle of nerves all afternoon, rearranging furniture twice, changing her shirt 3 times. Now she stood frozen, face to face with her mother for the first time since that catastrophic Friday dinner 2 weeks ago. "Mom," Julia said quietly, her voice fragile. "Sweetheart," Evelyn's voice cracked, thick with emotion. The flowers trembled slightly in her hands. "These are for you." The woman at the market said zinnias represent endurance and lasting affection. Julia took the flowers carefully. "They're beautiful. Thank you." Douglas stepped forward, extending his hand, a tentative gesture. He wore dark jeans and a simple navy sweater. No tie, no blazer. "Owen, thank you for not closing the door." I shook his hand, noting the calluses, rough against my palm, that hadn't been there before. "You drove the Camry?" I asked, a hint of curiosity in my voice. "Yeah, sold both Mercedes last week. We wanted to understand what normal feels like." Julia led her mother to the kitchen while Douglas and I moved to the living room. His eyes found the photographs on our walls. Julia and me on our courthouse wedding day, young and broke, grinning like idiots. Quinn at various ages, gap-toothed and laughing. No professional portraits, just life, raw and real, captured in snapshots. "You have a nice home," Douglas said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "It feels lived in. Loved. 800 square feet, 1 bathroom. But it's ours," I replied, a quiet pride in my voice. "The house in Westlake is 5,000 square feet, and I've never felt at home there. It's just a showcase." Julia had insisted on cooking herself. So, dinner tonight was spaghetti with homemade marinara, her specialty, perfected over 20 years. Garlic bread, a simple salad. Douglas pulled a bottle from his canvas bag. I brought wine. The guy at the Austin wine merchant said it pairs well with Italian food. I accepted the $12 Montepulciano with its handwritten tag, perfect for casual dinners with people you care about. "This is great. Thank you." The women emerged from the kitchen, both having clearly cried. The quiet release of tension held too long. Julia set the flowers in an old mason jar at the center of our table. The sunflowers blazed bright yellow against the worn wood, a vibrant, hopeful contrast. We arranged ourselves, Julia and me on one side, Douglas and Evelyn on the other. No one at the head. Just 4 people, attempting something fragile, something new. When we were all served, a hesitant silence descended. Finally, Douglas cleared his throat. "I need to say something." He set down his fork. "What I did to you both over the past 21 years isn't something a simple apology can fix, but I need you to hear it." He looked directly at me, his gaze steady, regret etched deep in his eyes. "Every dinner at our house, I made you feel small. Every comment about your job, your clothes, your car, it was designed to diminish you." His voice grew rough, hoarse with emotion. "That check, $275,000. I calculated it to be more than 7 years of your salary, so I could throw that number in your face." Julia inhaled sharply, a pained gasp. I reached for her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "The cruelest part," Douglas continued, his voice barely a whisper, "is that you saved my company. Every major expansion, the Domain project, the downtown tower, the flood recovery, it was all funded by your capital. You kept us afloat while I treated you like you were worthless." He paused, taking a ragged breath. "You were doing what my grandfather's partner asked, to save the company and save me from myself. And I repaid that by trying to humiliate you." Evelyn placed her hand over Douglas's, then turned to Julia, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "Baby, I failed you." Her voice was barely a whisper. "From the time you were young, I taught you that your value came from who you married, where you lived, what people thought. I measured your worth in all the wrong ways." Tears tracked through her carefully applied makeup. "When you fell in love with Owen, I saw it as failure. I spent 21 years mourning the life I thought you deserved, never seeing the beautiful, honest life you'd actually chosen." She looked at me, a profound, humbling realization in her eyes. "You loved my daughter when she had nothing to offer but herself. You built a life on honesty, and I called that failure. And Quinn," Evelyn added, her voice breaking, "we poisoned her. Every comment about money and status, we taught her to value all the wrong things. What she said at that dinner, those were our words. We raised her to think people like you don't matter. Now she's lost. Douglas nodded, his face mirroring Evelyn's raw grief. We did. I accept your apologies, I said quietly, my voice calm and firm. But accepting isn't forgetting. If we rebuild this, it has to be real. No more judgment based on appearances. Yes, Douglas said immediately, his head snapping up. Julia, I turned to my wife. This is your decision. You've carried this pain the longest. Julia looked at her parents, her gaze unwavering. I want a relationship with you, but not the old one. I can't apologize for choosing love over status. I can't watch you treat my husband like he's less than human. We don't want that, Evelyn said urgently, leaning forward. We want to know you. Really know you. I want to learn from you, Owen, Douglas added, a vulnerability in his tone I'd never heard before. How you've built a marriage on honesty, how you've protected people who were hurting you. There's something Christ-like in that. Then we try, Julia said softly. We start small. Dinner every couple of weeks. Here. You come as you are. No performance. Simple food, honest talk. We'll take that, Evelyn said through fresh tears, a genuine smile finally touching her eyes. Douglas raised his glass, his hand shaking. To family. Not the one we performed for others, but the one we actually are. We clinked glasses. The wine was decent, honest, and unpretentious. The spaghetti had cooled during the apologies, but no one cared. We ate slowly, conversation starting and stopping. Evelyn asked about the foundation Julia had mentioned. Douglas talked about his consulting role, 2 days a week, mentoring instead of commanding. Rebecca Marshall is brilliant, Douglas admitted. She's doing things I should have implemented years ago. The evening stretched from 7 to 9, then past 10. Discomfort gradually gave way to something tentative, not quite forgiveness, but the beginning of it. We washed dishes together, a strangely domestic scene given the seismic shift that had just occurred. When they prepared to leave, Evelyn embraced Julia with a fierceness that spoke of years of withheld affection. I love you. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it without conditions. I know, Mom, Julia replied, her voice muffled against Evelyn's shoulder. We'll figure it out. Douglas pulled me into an awkward hug, a genuine warmth emanating from him. Thank you, Owen. Thank you for giving us another chance. For being better than we deserved. After they left, the Camry's taillights disappearing down Holly Street, Julia and I stood on our small porch. Do you think they mean it? Julia asked, her voice laced with a fragile hope. I thought about Douglas's calloused hands, about Evelyn's farmer's market flowers, about apologies offered without excuses. I think they're trying. Really trying. Julia nodded. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. But maybe it's giving people space to become different. Maybe I agreed. We stood watching our quiet street, feeling the weight and possibility of it all settle into something we could carry forward. The hurt wasn't erased, not entirely, but something had shifted. A door had opened, a path cleared, a chance offered, and tentatively accepted. Sometimes a beginning is enough. Spring arrived in Austin with the kind of quiet confidence I'd come to associate with lasting change. 3 months had passed since that dinner at the Westlake estate, 3 months that felt simultaneously like a lifetime and no time at all. I stood in the parking lot of Harrington Development's Congress Avenue Tower at 6:30 on a Thursday evening, watching the last sliver of daylight paint the downtown skyline copper and gold. Rebecca Marshall's leadership had transformed the company in ways I hadn't anticipated. The stock had climbed 35% in the first quarter alone, not through aggressive expansion or risky ventures, but through operational excellence and a renewed focus on projects that genuinely served community needs. The quarterly report on my passenger seat told a story of steady growth, ethical partnerships, and a corporate culture shifting from ego to genuine purpose. Douglas came in 2 days a week now, Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. I'd taken to timing my visits to coincide with his, not to monitor him, but because I discovered something unexpected. I actually valued his insights when they weren't wrapped in condescension. This morning, I'd watched him sit with 3 young project managers, listening more than talking, asking questions instead of issuing pronouncements. They're brilliant, he'd told me afterward, his voice carrying a humility I'd never heard before. That Chin kid designing the affordable housing complex near Mueller? He's thinking 20 years ahead. Sustainability, community integration, things I should have been prioritizing decades ago. The Mercedes was gone, sold 3 weeks after the board meeting. Douglas now drove a silver Toyota Camry, practical, anonymous, exactly like thousands of others on Austin roads. He'd told Julia it was about understanding what normal felt like, about remembering that most people navigate the world without luxury as a cushion against consequence. But the most profound change wasn't visible from a parking lot or a boardroom. The Hartley Family Foundation had officially launched in January with a $75 million endowment, roughly 4% of my Harrington holdings, structured through a trust that would ensure sustainable funding for generations. Julia had transitioned from hesitant volunteer to confident director with a speed that both surprised and didn't surprise me. She'd always had this capacity for leadership. She'd simply never had permission to use it. The Foundation's mission was precisely targeted: scholarships for first-generation college students from working-class families, emergency housing assistance for people facing eviction, and job training programs for adults re-entering the workforce. These are the kids nobody expects to succeed, Julia had told a gathering of potential donors last month. The ones working 2 jobs while taking night classes. The single mothers studying for the GRE on the bus. The formerly incarcerated trying to rebuild their lives with zero safety net. These are the people who will change our world if someone just gives them a fighting chance. I'd watched from the back of the room as heads nodded, as checkbooks opened, as Julia transformed wealth into purpose with a clarity that left me breathless. Evelyn had become one of the Foundation's most dedicated volunteers. This still shocked me, though I tried not to show it. She came in 15 hours a week, 3 full days, doing work that would have been unthinkable to her 6 months ago, stuffing envelopes, answering phones, scheduling appointments with families who desperately needed help. Julia had told me about finding her mother in the small kitchen area one afternoon, making coffee for a young woman who had just received her first scholarship check and was crying too hard to speak. Mom just held her, Julia had recounted, her own eyes wet. Didn't try to fix it or give advice. Just held her and let her cry. Something essential had shifted in Evelyn. She'd traded her museum fundraiser galas for Foundation orientations. Her country club connections now served to recruit mentors for first-generation students. The woman who'd once measured worth in pedigrees and property now spent her Wednesdays helping families navigate emergency rent assistance paperwork. I wasted so much time, she'd told me quietly 2 weeks ago when I'd stopped by the Foundation office. Chasing things that didn't matter. Teaching Julia to chase them too. She'd looked up at me, her carefully maintained composure cracking slightly. Thank you for loving her better than we did. The bi-weekly family dinners had become our new normal. Douglas and Evelyn arriving at our East Austin home every other Friday at 7 o'clock, staying until 9 or 10, helping with dishes, sometimes lingering on the back porch to watch the neighborhood's transformation unfold. Douglas brought wine from the local shop on East 6th Street now, mid-range bottles chosen because the clerk recommended them. Evelyn brought flowers from the farmer's market. They asked about my work, genuinely interested. They laughed at Julia's terrible puns. They acted, in other words, like family. It wasn't perfect. Evelyn still sometimes caught herself offering unsolicited advice, and Douglas occasionally slipped into CEO mode. But it was real. Awkward, effortful, and real. Quinn's absence, though, hung over these dinners like a ghost we all politely ignored. My daughter had written me a letter 6 weeks ago. 3 pages in her careful handwriting, sent to the Foundation office because she apparently couldn't bring herself to use our home address. Dad, I'm writing this from a coffee shop in East Austin, not far from your house, actually. Though I'm not ready to knock on your door yet. I've walked past it twice, chickened out both times. I've thought a lot about what I said at that dinner. About you holding Mom back. I was so sure I was right. So confident. I've been working in marketing for a startup for 6 weeks now. Entry level, meaning I fetch coffee and update spreadsheets and get yelled at when I make mistakes. I live in a studio apartment that costs 60% of my salary. I take the bus. I buy generic brands. I've learned to cook ramen 5 different ways. And you know what's weird? I'm happier than I've ever been. Not because poverty is noble or struggle builds character. I'm happier because I'm building something that's actually mine. Because when my boss praised my work last week, I knew I'd earned it. Grandma and Grandpa told me what you really are. What you've been this whole time. I don't know how to apologize for what I said. Those words showed you exactly who I was becoming, and you were right to call me out. I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I'm just asking you to know that I'm working on becoming someone worthy of it. Love. Quinn. I'd shown the letter to Julia, who'd cried and immediately wanted to invite Quinn to dinner. I gently suggested we wait, not as punishment, but because Quinn was doing something important. She was learning to stand on her own. Julia had met with Quinn twice for coffee since, cautious meetings where they talked about the Foundation and Quinn's job and the strange beauty of starting over. She asked about you, Julia had said after the second meeting, asked if you hated her. What did you tell her? That you never hated her. That you were just waiting for her to become herself. Standing in the parking lot as dusk settled over Austin, I pulled out my phone and opened the text message I drafted 3 times without sending. Quinn, your mother told me about your job, about your apartment, about the fact that you're building a life that belongs to you. I'm proud of you. Not because you're struggling, but because you're learning what it means to create value instead of just claiming it. When you're ready, our door is open. Not because you're forgiven, you don't need my forgiveness, but because you're always welcome. Because you're my daughter and I love you. Take your time. Do the work. Become who you're meant to be. And when you're ready to come home for dinner, just let us know. Asterisk dad. I hit send before I could second guess the message. Watched the blue bubble disappear. And exhaled slowly. The parking lot had emptied around me. Downtown glowed in the gathering dark. Somewhere in Westlake Hills, Douglas was probably reviewing proposals, learning to serve instead of command. Evelyn was likely planning next week's foundation schedule. And somewhere in a studio apartment not far from here, Quinn was heating up ramen, or updating spreadsheets, or simply sitting with the uncomfortable reality of starting over. I climbed into my 15-year-old Accord and headed east, toward home. Toward Julia and our modest house, and the life we'd built on purpose rather than pretense. 3 months ago, I'd walked into that Westlake estate carrying 23 years of secrets. I'd walked out carrying something far more valuable, the certain knowledge of what truly mattered. Rebecca Marshall would run the company brilliantly. The foundation would touch hundreds of lives through Julia's leadership. Douglas would finish his career as a mentor instead of a tyrant. Evelyn would discover that service brings more satisfaction than status ever could. Quinn would build herself into someone remarkable. And I would go home to the woman who'd chosen me when I had nothing to offer but honesty, cooked dinner in our tiny kitchen, and count myself wealthy in all the ways that actually matter. The traffic light at 6th Street turned green. I accelerated through the intersection, heading home, carrying with me the quiet certainty that the greatest victories are the ones that change hearts instead of just circumstances. That wealth means nothing without purpose. That power without humility destroys everything it touches. That family, real family, is built through truth and forgiveness and the patient work of showing up, choosing love, even when it's complicated. 3 months ago, I was a billionaire pretending to be nobody. Tonight, I was just Owen Hartley, heading home to my wife, grateful for second chances and transformed hearts and the messy, beautiful work of reconciliation. Somewhere ahead, our porch light was on. Julia would be waiting. And that, more than anything, was enough. Tonight, after another Friday dinner, after Douglas and Evelyn had left with real smiles, Julia and I stood on our small back porch overlooking East Austin. The evening had turned cool, that particular Texas spring temperature where you could finally breathe. City lights spread out below us, a constellation of lives being lived. The Congress Avenue tower I'd financed caught the last rays of sunset. Julia leaned against the railing, looking out at the neighborhood we'd called home for 2 decades. The coffee shop on the corner, the taco truck that knew our order, the park where we used to take Quinn when she was small. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "Regret what?" "Letting them humiliate you for so long. 21 years of their dinners, their comments, their contempt. You could have stopped it at any time." I thought about those years against this precious moment. The dinners where Douglas had lectured me while spending my money. The holidays where Evelyn had introduced me without apologetic tone. "Never," I said finally. "Because now I know your parents love you more than their pride. It just took losing you to realize it. You chose me for who I am, and I don't need anyone's permission to be myself." She turned to face me, city lights reflecting in her eyes. "But who are you, Owen Hartley? After all this, who are you really?" "I'm a 51-year-old logistics consultant," I said slowly, a small smile touching my lips. "I help small businesses because I like solving puzzles that actually matter. I'm a billionaire investor who learned wealth without purpose is just numbers. And I'm your husband, the part I'm proudest of." I pulled her closer, both of us looking out at the city we loved. "And I'm the man who proved that the most powerful people are usually the ones nobody notices. The ones too busy doing the work to announce their presence." She smiled, a knowing, gentle smile. "You enjoyed it, didn't you? The secret. The knowing." Not enjoyed exactly, but there was something clarifying about watching. People reveal who they really are when they think you're powerless. Seeing what they truly value when they believe you have nothing they want. "And what did you see?" I thought about Douglas, about the man who'd gambled away millions. About Evelyn, who'd built her identity on appearances and was now discovering service. About Quinn, learning that respect has to be earned. I saw that your parents are capable of change when forced to face real consequences. I saw that Quinn needed to lose everything to figure out who she actually is. I saw that Preston Chambers drew a line when he could have completed that fraud deal. And me? What did you learn about me? That you're stronger than either of us knew. That you chose me every single day for 21 years, even when it cost you your family's approval. That you never once made me feel like marrying you was a mistake. "I didn't," she said softly. "Wonder. I mean, there were moments when I wished things were easier, but I never wished I'd chosen differently." She turned in my arms, her head resting against my chest. "You know what I learned? That the man I married was exactly who I thought he was. Someone who valued character over comfort. The money didn't change that. It just proved it." I kissed her then, soft and certain. "What do you think they're doing right now?" she asked, her voice muffled. "My parents, I mean." I thought about Douglas in his smaller house, the one they'd moved to after selling the Westlake estate. 3 bedrooms instead of 7, a yard they maintain themselves. Neighbors they actually talk to. Learning, I said. Actually learning. Douglas is discovering he's better at teaching than leading. He likes working with young executives, showing them what he learned the hard way. Evelyn's finding out that service is more fulfilling than status. She told me last week she wishes she'd started this 20 years ago. Do you believe her? I do. Because she's not performing anymore. She shows up at the foundation in jeans and actually works. That's not something you fake for 3 months straight. And Quinn? The questions still hurt, but time had given me distance. Quinn's building something real, I said. It'll take time, but she's figuring out who she is when success has to come from her own hands instead of her last name. Do you think she'll ever really apologize? Eventually. When she understands what she's apologizing for, not just the words, but the values behind them. The assumption that worth equals wealth. A police siren wailed somewhere to the south. Normal city sounds. You know what's funny? Julia said. My mother stops at the taco truck now. She knows the owner's name. She asks about his kids. I smiled. Evelyn Harrington, taco truck regular. Your younger self would never have believed it. We stood there as the evening deepened, as city lights grew brighter against the darkening sky. I chose love, I said quietly. I chose to believe in second chances, even when they weren't deserved yet. I chose honesty over secrecy. And I chose to prove that being underestimated can be the greatest advantage if you use it right. How do you use it right? You don't just win. You win with grace. You show people who they could be instead of just punishing them. You remember that power without mercy is just cruelty, and that the strongest thing you can do is forgive people who haven't earned it yet. She took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. I'm proud of you, she said simply. I'm proud of us, I said. Somewhere, Douglas was learning. Somewhere, Evelyn was discovering purpose. Somewhere, Quinn was earning respect the hard way. And here, in the modest house we'd chosen, with 21 years of love surrounding us, we were rich in the only ways that count. Not in what we owned, but in who we'd become. And in knowing that the greatest power isn't in being seen or acknowledged. It's in being underestimated, proving everyone wrong, and still offering grace when you could have chosen cruelty. When nobody expects you to win, victory tastes sweeter. But when you win with love instead of vengeance, that's when you know you've actually won something worth having.